Okay, so let's continue. Okay, so we talked about the output man, no? So we just okay, so we talked about the output. So to pick up where I last left off, all of these factors affect the output. Okay, the growth characteristics of our seedlings and plants. However, if you want to focus on the effect of the type of fertilizer, you have stuff that we have to keep constant. So we could keep constant the type of seeds. So i-set na siya to usa ka plant para masayon. We could keep constant the amount of sunlight. So they are going to be kanang placed, all the seeds or the samples are going to be placed in one place lang. The amount of water is to be kept constant set to 500 ml per day, let's say. And also the amount of fertilizer. So what we will be left behind is the type of fertilizer, okay, that we have. Since we want to focus on the effect of the type of fertilizer man, di ba? Ano siya? So, in this case, ang atong independent variable kasi type of fertilizer, while the dependent variables are the growth characteristics of our seedlings and plants, namely whatever that we will declare, which could be the height na grown, the yield, if ganahan mo, or if you want to look at the yield or the number of leaves, etc. So, as an analogy, pretty sure all of you have already passed or completed your kanang general mathematics mo, no? So you already know about functions. So independent and dependent variables are similar to those things. So mga kanang mga variables and yung functions like x kasi independent, while si dependent, while fx is dependent. Kung mo depend man siya ni x, mo depend siya sa input ni independent. Your dependent, as seen here, your dependent variable is a function of your independent variable. From the word itself, mo dependent, mo depend siya. Asa siya mo depend? Si dependent, ni independent. Okay. So, pinalusok po siya style. So from here, like let's say nga from the previous examples, the water, if you want to look at the effect of the water to rice ratio, we would want to look at the effect of water to rice ratio, ang imong i-declare independent si water to rice ratio on the qualities of your rice. And if you want to look at the effect of the cooking time, si cooking time ang imong independent variable nga mo affect sa imong qualities mo rice. So these are from the same example on cooking rice. While si type of fertilizer, sa second example, most of them declare nga independent variable sa imong growth characteristics. All right. So let's say nga I've looked at some of your answers dito sa survey bitaw nga gikuan, and then gi-perform na ko last time, and di ba I asked sa inyong study nga what are your independent and dependent sa mga variables, and some of you need help murag ani sa mo kanang lisod kay mo kay murag I feel like murag kana kwan you have this misconception on what independent and dependent variables are. So let's try to correct the misconception ha. Let's say for this example, when you're trying to determine the effectivity of chili and tomato as insecticide, so similar ni siya to some of your studies. Some students kay lang gibutan nila sa independent variable kay ang material lang na gigamit as insecticide, chili and tomato. And the dependent na variables kay mortality rate of insects, which is correct siya. Pero what do you mean by chili and tomato? Why do you think nganong kanima na mong nganong kanira man mong gisuwat? Supposedly unta dapat kompleto. If nagkanang kuan, kabaw ko sa uban ninyong mga studies, nag-differ mo sa inyong ratio sa chili and tomato. So thus, kung kompletuhon siya, to be strict kay ang correct na kay ratios of chili and tomato ang butang since mao man ang imuhang gi-vary. Ang imong gi-vary mao nang imuhang independent variable. You're trying to look nga sa imuhang variable nga gi-vary, mo affect ba ni siya sa imuhang dependent variable na or naa ba siya effect? And if so, if na-effect, unsa man yung effect? Mo increase ba si dependent with increasing the independent or parang kuan ba? or kanang mulahi ba siya, or if you're trying to compare two different types, which we will see later. So, mana siya, example na. Second example, when you are trying to determine the effect of varying drying time. So, nagibutang na diri ang varying ha. Si drying time ang gi-vary. So, unsa man siya nga drying time of tea leaves? Tea leaves to the acceptability of tea produced. So, if ako ang kanakuan ni, if ako ang ipa-interpret ani sa unsay gibuhat sa researcher, the researcher is trying to vary the drying time sa tea leaves unya ang ending na mga products kay gipa evaluate sa mga respondents kay acceptability man asang ta mangitag acceptability sa mga respondents ra, di ba? So, naiuban nga, as I've said, incomplete ang ilahang ang ilahang mga i-declare as independent and dependent na variables. Correct ni? Fine, let's say. But kung to be strict pa jud, ma-improve pa jud siya nga nga statement acceptability of T. Kani, murag, kuwang kani siya. Okay? Ang correct nita dapat ani pa kung ang pagamon sa imong pa-declareon sa imong independent o dependent nga variable. Since klaro na mga varying and drying time. Ibutang ni sa independent variable, the drying time of tea leaves. Kompletuon jud na siya. Do not be scared nga dili siya one word. It doesn't have to be one word. You can just kompletuon siya para mas klaro. Dependent variables ay acceptability of tea based on survey results. So, as I've said earlier. Next, let's try kanina sa example. When you are trying to determine the effect of introducing okay. When you are let's say kanina when you are trying to determine the effect of introducing malunggay leaves to the bowel performance of mice. So, some of you as I've said, one word like ay mo pag let's try to let's try to be clear sa ani nga part because importante na kayo na siya nga maka-state mo sa independent nga variables properly in order na makagama mo sa statement of the problem properly said, which will direct kung direct kung asa pa doon yung research. Ang correct ani kay since you're trying to determine the effect of introducing malunggay leaves, mura kag ang ganahan buhatan sa researcher kay you're trying to introduce malunggay leaves sa diet sa mga rats and look at its effect sa bowel performance sa mga rats. So, ang independent variable is a type of diet. And by type of diet, I mean pag nga na ay malunggay or without malunggay. Okay? Or you could just say say it differently nga the inclusion of malunggay in rodent diets. So, pwede ra sa in the dependent variable, since we are looking at the bowel performance of mice, you have different aspects na pwede mo tan-awon. So you could look at the fecal characteristics and characteristics of poo sa mga mice. You could look at the bowel movement characteristics of mice, how often they poo and how much they poo, and how much poo they produce, and the overall health of mice. So all of these mo contribute siya sa bowel performance of mice eventually. Now, let's look at let's go to the writing of the statement of the problem. So generally, if naka-watch mo, please kindly watch the first the YouTube link that I sent you prior mo continue ani because I think mas makarelate mo kung watch mo at the first. So ang I made this video para lang mo unsay kasi kanto kay tailored man siya for non-STEM. I made this video for you guys mga STEM na mga students so that mas makagets mo ani nga without the limitation nga pong non-STEM tong sa PICAS. Okay. So based on the video, it states nga ang statement of the problem it involves two parts, general or main objective and the specific objectives. So the general and main objective, it provides the focus of the research. It is usually expressed in terms of not usually. It is expressed in terms of declarative form. So in terms of sentence form siya. It should include the following, but wherever lang kung applicable. kani siya purpose of study. So all kanakuan experimental studies and observational studies kinaadyo ni siya. You have to state the purpose of study sa imuhang general or main objective. Respondents, not all research papers have respondents, especially kung katong mga research scientific papers na purely experimental reviewed. Okay? So you don't have two places of wala mo'y respondents. And environment and general address wherever mo kung significant ang inyuhang kanang environment sa inyuhang kanang study. So you could say na this study took place in Dr. Cecilia Putong National High School in school year 2020-2021. Pero it will be more significant ni siya nga matter kung unsay nga na related ni siya ko sa kanang sa na respondents na involved, and also time frame, so as I said later, and also the output. Okay, so ang general or main objective kay it could be stated, it could start in many ways, but usually it's pwede siya start in these typical na mga ways. So the main objective of the study is the research will assess, the research will evaluate, naman na siya, blah, blah, blah. So, I will hand over examples or unsang pag-write general or main objective. So, when you are trying to determine the effectivity of chili and tomato as natural insecticide. So, kabawa na ka sa sa jet base! Tag gama akong video! Leche! Okay, sige. Okay, so when you're trying to determine again, siya. So you have your independent variables, and then you have this is how kanang the general objective. If ako pagbuton sa general objective, this is how I would state it. So the main objective of the study is to determine the effectivity of chili and tomato as natural alternative insecticide. Okay, that's yung general objective. Examples rito, but you of course you could produce better outputs than the ones na akong hatag sa examples karon. So second example, when you are trying to assess the effect of introducing malunggay leaves to the bowel performance of mice. So you have independent variables, the type of diet, the independent variable, the fecal characteristics. The general objective is, of course, the research will assess the effect of the inclusion of malunggay leaves. So this could actually potentially be your title as in my size like so yeah, the statement even in on itself kay kuan na siya, pwede na siya kanang possible na mahimong title. Okay, but next we will look at these specific mga objectives. So these specific objectives are statements that will usually address the realization of the research objective, and they are usually expressed in terms of interrogative forms. It should include the following. So if applicable lang ni siya. So of course, since experimental man ang mga study sa kanang STEM kay wala na dili ka siya ma-reflect, but in case lang nga na ay mga respondents ka mga involved, so include wherever fit. And second one is the assessment of the independent variable. Assessment of the independent variable, hypothesis testing on the relationship of variables. So if na relationship, if you're trying to determine the relationship nila or to look at the significant difference on the measured variable based on groups. So categorical, kani siya categorical, kani siya kay kuan say nga na eh. Discrete kung mag-involve sa discrete nga data. Okay? And of course, the output study where you will base your recommendations and conclusions from. So when you're trying to determine the effectivity of chili and tomato as insecticide, giving an example, you have here the independent and dependent variables. So let's try to write the specific objectives para ani nga. Since wala may respondents, of course, wala na to siya. Independent variables. What na naman dire ratios of chili and tomato and the type of insecticide used. So, for basically ang plano buhaton ni researcher kay he or she is trying to compare the natural insecticide with that of the commercial ones. And at the same time, he or she is trying to compare the performance of different natural insecticides ng lahi-lahi o ratios. Okay? So, kani siya. Si question number 1 is specific objective 1. What are the types of insecticides used in the study? So, kani siya. Naigo siya. 2. What are the ratios of chili and tomatoes observed in this study? Naigo siya. So, assessment of independent variables, check. Next, assessment of dependent variables. Since ang dependent variable na to ay mortality rate of insects, of course, na to, what is the mortality rate of insects? So, check. Let's continue. Sa hypothesis cell testing. Now, is there a significant difference on the mortality rate between using commercial insecticide with that of natural insecticide? So, since categorical man ni siya apart, kaning apart, chili tomato insecticide versus commercial. This category 1 kadang kuan. Mangutan na siya if there is a significant difference. Kaning apart since duha ra mga categories ang kuan dire ang kanang kuan ang naa dire kaning si natural unya si commercial insecticide. So kani sila kay mao ni siya ang kani nga question kay mao ni siya ang imong i-answer ani kay ang imuhang nakuha nga results from the statistical nga treatment. Kay nangutana man siya significant difference. So ana nimo gawas nimo siya mogawas ang imuhang hypothesis testing ng mga statistical treatment. So katong p-value, if ang p-value kuan ba siya greater than or less than sa imuhang critical p or p-value if magkuan ka ANOVA ka and so on and so forth. Okay? Basically, all of the objectives nga written sa imuhang studies SOP dapat siya ma-answer sa imuhang research paper. Okay. Next, which among the different ratios is the most effective as natural insecticide? So, aning a part, so mani siya ma-answer ani. Relationship ani with ani. Kani sa relationship ani with ani. Okay? And output of our study. So based on the findings of our study, kani nga part, kani last nga output of our study, this won't actually be reflected sa imong results in discussion, but more on sa imong recommendations or conclusions sa imong study. So based on the findings of our study, what do you recommend as a researcher to further improve the product or output? Okay? I hope na you also don't get the idea nga you have to state that this kailangan jud ingani nga way or ang uban ninyo nga mo kuan lang mo copy lang kung unsay ang presented but one way siya nga murag maka-improve is you don't as much as possible for quantitative studies you do not use first person or second person. You use third person always and be objective sa imuhang tone. Passive or objective sa imuhang tone, okay? So man na siya. So, kani siya. Let's try to look at this other na example. When you're trying to determine the effect of introducing malunggay leaves. So you have here the independent and dependent variables. Let's try to assess the independent variable. You have the type of diet, with or without malunggay. So assessment of the independent variable, check. What type of diets are being observed in the study? So ma-answer na yung na share right away. Assessment of the dependent variable. So we have here the feces characteristics, bowel movement, and overall health of mice. So You could state here sa assessment on dependent variable. And second question, what are the effects of the inclusion of the malunggay on the feces characteristics, bowel movements, and overall health of mice? Hypothesis testing. So since you have two categories naman ang gitanaw, so tanang mga kuan mo ni kay mag-start to check, is there a significant difference? So is there a significant difference between the feces characteristics of mice, the bowel movement characteristics of mice, and the overall health of mice fed with malunggay and without malunggay? So kani sila, kailangan ka mag-present og p-value. Inaabot sa kanang results and discussions nga section, kailangan ka mag-present og p-value for each of these questions. Okay? In order to address these objectives, individual na mga objectives. Okay, so next, output of our study. So based on the findings of our study, is the inclusion of malunggay in rodent diets recommended? I mean, this is a good nga tone na to be used sa imuhang to be used sa imuhang SOP or basically sa imuhang research paper as a whole. Kay dili siya it's formal, okay? It's formal and it's third person. You could kani siya pwede pa nimo ni siya ma-improve, okay? Like you could improve the tone. You don't use I or you. Okay, you just use nga kuan. If not, what are the recommendations as the researcher in for the future researchers and future studies? We just state it differently like that. So what does it look like the eye on other studies? Let's try to take a look. Okay, so for other studies, Kai, discard. Okay, so for the other studies, Kai, let's try to look at my kanakuan examples ani ha. Some people kay ang ilang include sa ilahang study, especially for international journals, kay ang kuan lang, ang general objective lang. They don't usually include the specific objectives. Like usually kanang kuan ilang na ipakita dito ang ilahang specific objectives, i-reflect na nila silang results and discussion. So, like for example, this study is about the public acceptance of biofuels in the transport sector in Finland. So, of course, from title topic itself, makita na kung asa dapit ang unsang study about. So, public acceptance. Public acceptance, it means nga researchers nangutana sa nangita sa kung unsay acceptance sa mga tao sa public nga people, public nga mga respondents on biofuels in the transport sector. Unsa nilahang opinions and views and stuff. So with that, usually ang kanang general objective is located at the last na paragraph or near the last part sa imuhang introduction. Di sila pareha nato nga murag maghatag og separate na section or even a separate paper for the SOP. But kani siya kay included yun siya sa imuhang introduction ang imuhang general objective. Para sa nang ma-check nako ang SOP kay separate lang sa siya nga paper katong complete nga with general objective and the specific objective. The actual paper and the actual research paper kay kanira dapat ang makita ng general. So, let's say mana siya. Look at this. So, the aim of the study, so this is the general objective, is to have an overview of what the potential customers of biofuels think about its sustainability and what would motivate them to change their consumer behavior in favor of biofuels. So, the same with this study. So, this is the general objective, but you cannot see, as I've said, you cannot see the specific na objectives. So, madisura na siya, makita rin na siya sa research, sa results and discussion. So, gibutan nila there ang background information, a social perspective, and community perspective, and etc. Okay, let's try to look at a different paper now. Okay, this is about the awareness of secondary school students about renewable energy sources. So, straight to the point, kayo ang iyahang title. Okay? So this is still a survey type research, but I'm going to show this to you so that makaibaw mo kung unsang giunsa sa ubang mga researchers ang ilahang pag-state sa ilahang kanang general objectives. So as I've said, introduction, and then at the end of the introduction kay makita here ang imuhang aim or the general objective. So when it is considered from this perspective, the aim of this study is to ano siya, specify the level of cognitive and affective awareness for renewable energy sources of secondary education level students who will have roles in various areas in the future. Okay. So mata siya. So I hope na with this kanakuan, I hope na-enlighten mo kung saan na siya pag-formulate of statement of the problem. I will, of course, give more examples on this in the future. So, thank you for listening, and God bless.